The audio podcast of the Vaishnava Foundation for October 2022 is entitled Dons of the ISKCON, air quotes, Empire. Hari Om Namaha. Evang parampara praptam imang rajar shayo viduhu sa kaleneha mahata yogo nashtaha parantapa. Having thus been received by disciplic succession, this spiritual science was understood by the self-realized kings. That great science of yoga was scattered or destroyed in this world by the influence of time. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 2. Lines of spiritual and devotional disciplic succession are not maintained like organized religions. They require perfect men in an unbroken line of succession in order to continue them. They can be much more easily destroyed than the organized religions of Kali Yuga. The classic example is that Lord Krishna reveals to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra that one such line, which the Lord wishes to reestablish through Arjuna, has been destroyed. That was over 5,000 years ago. The Vedic kings at that time were very great men, with some exceptions. Some of them were even self-realized rishis. The Brahmins and Sannyasis were very great men, very knowledgeable and pure, especially when compared to the Brahmins of today. Yet a bona fide line of disciplic succession, or at least a branch of it, had been scattered and destroyed at that time. The Lord wanted to reconstitute it, and Arjuna was selected to do so. The point here is to realize just how easily, at this time in Kali Yuga, branches of a bona fide disciplic succession can be quickly and effectively destroyed in a short space of time. The Brahmins are weaker today. The Sannyasis, if there are any of them still left, are not as inclined to tapasya and not as knowledgeable. The managers, there are no saintly kings anymore, obviously. The managers are much more prone to corruption and compromise. Quote, "This is our management, very bad management. What can I do? This is our movement. We have to select men from the worst class," unquote. That's Prabhupada in a room conversation on May 27th, 1977. And next one is from ISKCON Communications Journal of 1994. Quote, "Prabhupada constructed his movement out of dubious raw material. In writing about his difficulties in managing the movement, he made the following striking statement, quote, 'Krishna did not send me any first-class men. He sent me only second and third-class men,' unquote." Now, notice the date on that first room conversation. It's only a day previous to that fateful meeting between Prabhupada and all of his GBC men in his room at the Krishna Balaram Center. Many, if not most of them, had already arrived there by that time. He made it clear in the meeting that he wanted regular gurus, and he did not name a successor. After he departed, instead of regular gurus, his branch of Lord Chaitanya's Hare Krishna movement got 11 pretender Mahabhagavats who functioned like criminal dons in controlling for their own advantage everything in their zones. His branch of the Krishna consciousness movement was basically ruined when this major deviation went down. Prabhupada spoke about bad management in his movement more than once. Here's another example. Quote, "The Miami situation is a great discredit for us because we have made such a bad impression on the neighbors that they have kicked us out. This is because of nasty management. Rupanuga was the GBC and now you are. Why it cannot be made clean? Abhiram has proved his poor management, so he must be replaced," unquote. That's an excerpt from a letter to one of his leading secretaries, specifically Satsvarup, on June 4th, 1975. It's common sense that His Divine Grace would not want to highlight the bad management that was gradually spreading in his movement by the mid-70s, and at the same time, he did not gaslight it. There were many causes of it, and the all-pervading, deceptive influence of the plainclothes pick was one of those factors. It led to many ills, particularly to rampant dishonesty in dealings, yes, in dealings within the movement. His leaders were becoming puffed up and sloppy by the mid-70s. Some of them were becoming narcissistic. A kind of cult megalomania was developing in some of the GBC zones. This would culminate in the dreadful self-apotheosis of 1978, 11-fold, as we all know. The most important issue here, however, is not the characters, personalities, styles, or methods of those who were controlling the movement. They were the agents of bad management in many cases, granted. Nevertheless, the real issue concerns what the most pliable followers of those various order givers of the centers were converted into under the bad influence of those leaders. What they were turned into by those men who, through various means, controlled them. Consider the perspective that there are four categories most important here. 1. Prabhupada's expectation for all of his disciples. 2. His leaders' divergent programming of the many followers they indoctrinated. 3. Cult stratification. And 4. Rank and file suppression. Concerning Prabhupada's expectations for his initiated disciples, we get clear indications about it in the following two excerpts from letters. In a letter to Hangsaduta, dated January 3rd, 1969, quote, "Maybe by 1975, all of my disciples will be allowed to initiate and increase the numbers of the generations, plural. That is my program," unquote. In the January 1978 issue of Back to Godhead, in an article entitled Srila Prabhupada Speaks Out, we find the following excerpt. This one's not from a letter. It's from the BTG. Quote, "Anyone who follows the previous leadership is a leader. All my disciples are leaders as much as they follow purely. If you want to follow, then you can also lead," unquote. Prabhupada's expectations for his disciples were high. He wanted all of them to become pure devotees. He wanted all of them to become learned in the essential revealed texts of Vaishnavism. He wanted all of his disciples to become leaders of his movement, and he also wanted them to become initiating spiritual masters as soon as possible. That was his expectation. It was not realized. Indeed, it did not ever come close to being realized. Yet even as late as his last year with us, he both wanted and expected this. but it did not come to pass. How were his disciples to reach what he wanted them to achieve? It was through rigorous, authorized training. Prabhupada wanted his initial leaders, which primarily meant the temple presidents, to train his newer disciples to reach the standard of his expectations. If you type the word train into the 2003 folio, it pulls up 193 hits. Now you have to subtract some of that for locomotive references. If you type training, the word training, into the folio, it pulls up 135 hits. These totals are not for the whole of the folio. They're only for the category called correspondence. In other words, references to training, mostly in letters to his leading secretaries and presidents. Training was instead surreptitiously replaced by divergent programming in ISKCON. How gradual this deviation was varied from center to center and temple president to temple president. We can know that this programming took a major uptick when the plainclothes deception pick emerged. At that time, devotees were quote-unquote trained in the deceptive techniques of ripping off vikarmis, all in the name of selling books. There was even a video created showing the step-by-step technique for what became known as the quote-unquote change-up. It was circulated by a prominent collector in the movement as he traveled from center to promote it. Krishna consciousness entails transcending the cycle of birth and death by first escaping the reactionary cycle of generating karma, mishra karma, and vik karma in one's actions. The immediate goal is to avoid generating any reactions. This is accomplished by not acting under the influence of ahankara, which is false ego. And everyone who is not engaged in a genuine form of yoga is automatically acting under ahankara or false ego. From Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 3, Text 30, in the purport, we find the following, quote, "The Lord instructs that one has to become fully Krishna conscious to discharge duties as if in military discipline. Such an injunction may make things a little difficult. Nevertheless, duties must be carried out with dependence on Krishna, because that is the constitutional position of the living entity," unquote. In the beginning, the movement was run in some very basic ways like a military chain of command. You followed your orders so as to engage in your assigned seva, confident it was linked to the Guru parampara. If you followed your orders received from the more advanced devotee above you in the chain of command, then you were assured that you were not generating any kind of karmic reaction whatsoever, and also linked to Prabhupada's mission and to him. This system worked when the devotees giving the orders, basically temple presidents and leading secretaries, were fully engaged according to the desires and directives of Prabhupada. Then, all seva performed under their direction was conducive to Naishkarma. Naishkarma means freedom from karmic reaction. As a spiritual consequence, all such action, seva, produces advancement on every plane for the devotee: physical, astral, causal, and transcendental beyond the Mahatattva. Since ahankara was not being actuated in such authorized Vaishnava activity, even as it was being carried out as if in military discipline, false ego automatically atrophied within every devotee so genuinely engaged. The breakdown of this parampara system took place when the directives coming from the upper echelons, first and second echelon, the second one being that of the temple presidents, when those directives got compromised by ahankara and material desire on the part of the managers, in other words, those who gave the orders. At the onset of that breakdown, the above-mentioned false ego and material desire took time to be spotted for what it was. That breakdown, however, could only worm its way into the Hare Krishna movement, which it certainly did, due to the gradual incorporation of stratification throughout virtually all of the centers. As soon as someone gets to the top of a cult turtle tank, he suppresses others in order to stay there. This is the material consciousness of overlording, which is not supposed to be present in bhakti cults. However, when that programming and stratification worked its way into the institutional tent of Prabhupada's movement, overlording, instead of genuine training, was going down virtually everywhere. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, was himself dealt with similarly by his senior godbrothers. He indicated this, usually somewhat indirectly, in a number of places. However, in one letter, he was very direct about it. Consider this excerpt from a letter to one of his temple presidents dated August 29th, 1972. Quote, "Do not be depressed. All along, my godbrothers gave me only depression, repression, compression, but I continued strong in my duty." Unquote. The international center referred to here throughout its history, even in those earlier years, was a hub of intense competition for superiority, a rotating arrangement of its presidency, soon abandoned, but not at the time of this letter that I just quoted. Even that rotating arrangement did not ultimately alleviate the situation. Again, analyze the excerpt. As a Grihastha, Prabhupada was a pure devotee. He was extremely knowledgeable in all of the Vaishnava Shastras. Yet he was undermined by many, if not most, in Gaudiya Math who were superior to him. He started a thriving center in Bombay. They took it away from him. He started a thriving ashram in Jhansi. This, of course, was in conjunction with the creation of the League of Devotees. Two elder godbrothers engaged in political intrigue, and the project failed. Although some of the readers will not be able to comprehend why it was so, his senior godbrothers called him, quote-unquote, Swami Maharaj, after he received sannyas, and this moniker was actually a backhanded compliment. None of his godbrothers helped him in the fledgling first year after he arrived in New York City. A disciple of one of his godbrothers, arguably the only one who was favorable to him since that godbrother gave him sannyas, that disciple of that godbrother snail-mailed a poorly packed container, barely deliverable, which contained cartels, incense, and a certificate stating that Prabhupada was a bona fide preacher in the Chaitanya line. Yes, better than nothing, but it did not directly come from a godbrother. In 1972, Prabhupada specifically stated that his godbrothers compressed his opportunities to develop and repressed his influence in the Gaudiya Math. We've quoted that excerpt from the letter. It's just been presented. Please note, also, although he could have very easily done so, he did not incorporate his organization in America as Gaudiya Math. By not incorporating it as Gaudiya Mat, in effect, he delinked it from having any connection to the remnants of Gaudiya Mat. By his own admission, Prabhupada underwent some depression. However, how long that lasted, how deep it was, and whether or not it was even slightly relevant once his Western mission got going, cannot be ascertained. The nature of his depression also cannot be ascertained, because no conditioned soul can truly understand the emotions of an Uttama Adhikari. What we can understand from his statement is its applicability to both ISKCON and so-called ISKCON. Know it well that compression and repression were baked into both cakes, especially integral to the latter thread, obviously. The institution's leaders were subduing the rank and file by bringing them under the sway of oppressors. The overlords also competed for followers and disciples via such subjugation, even while Prabhupada was still physically manifest. They quashed the effort of anyone trying to move up in the movement through legitimate means, which means via more tapasya, more purity, more knowledge, more realization, more seva, and or more spiritual power. Such stratification was meant to keep everyone in his place. And let me tell you, it was effective. The conclusive evidence of this was, of course, the unfettered emergence of the zonal Acharya era. The groundwork had been laid for it while Prabhupada was still with us. To reiterate, that groundwork was a clampdown on Prabhupada's expectations for all of his disciples to become pure devotees, initiating gurus and leaders. The 11 great pretenders were the chief agents of that clampdown, of course. Another proof was the programming that replaced genuine training in Krishna consciousness. More conclusive evidence was stratification of devotees into institutional categories and levels. If they tried to escape from it, they received only negative reinforcement from the higher-ups who were benefiting from that stratification. The fourth and final proof was, for the devotees who did not knuckle under it, being oppressed, depressed, suppressed, and compressed by all of these methods. This brings us to one particularly effective method. It was the subtle method of utilizing past statements or past orders which had lost their validity over time through changed circumstances, using those past statements and orders as if they were still completely relevant and applicable. The validity or lack thereof of past orders from the Guru, when applied to the present, must always be considered in terms of Nitya and naimittika. Consider the following excerpt from Sri Ishopanishad, verse 13, purport, quote, "Such accomplishments are possible only when one worships the real Krishna and not some fabricated so-called Krishna invented by foolish men who are without knowledge of the intricacies of the science of Krishna," unquote. Now let me ask you a question. Is there anything more eternal, powerful, pure, and perfect than Krishna? Yet herein it is verified that there can be a fabricated Krishna that people worship. The orders and injunctions of Prabhupada were stated, or you could say they were demanded, in variable settings. He set up a chain of command which was obliged to carry out his orders without change or compromise. But did they? Was the zonal imposition anything more than an invention? Was the forced worship of conditioned souls on opulent, elevated seats even by their god brothers and god sisters, anything more than a concoction? What about FDG? Just 3 examples have been provided here as illustrations of the principle. Be assured, there were and are more than these 3. Tattvamasi. All such deviations were carried out through the corporate agency of ISKCON, when seva was actually being performed according to authorized direction. That was the real ISKCON, or you could say the real Krishna. When that was being actuated, then the orders, the institution, and the Guru Parampara were all non-different. Since the leaders were carrying his orders, desires, and injunctions when that was actualized, then Prabhupada could order them to be followed. However, all of that was from long ago. Notice again this part from the Sri Upanishad quote. Quote, knowledge of the intricacies of the science of Krishna, unquote. His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, likened this science to a ripened fruit, something which was delicate and fragile in the sense that it could easily be deviated from, and its intricacies thus lost. Since deviation works to create a doppelganger, the changed movement would be made to look like the real thing later. Consider this. Quote, the knowledge mercifully given by the Lord is like a perfect fruit passed down from the top of a tree. The fruit must be passed delicately. If someone drops the fruit or lets it fall or in any way mishandles it, then the whole fruit is spoiled. If the bona fide spiritual master is in the line of disciplic succession from the Supreme Lord, he is careful to pass the fruit of Vedic wisdom to us without personally motivated interpretation, unquote. The system of absolutes, including Prabhupada's orders to follow his leaders from back in the day, was spoiled when bad leaders facilitated major deviation. Was there anything careful about how they imposed it? It was previously somewhat subtle and gradual, but not when the Zonlacharya imposition became the new vanguard. That was imposed as the equivalent to a smash and grab operation. Deviation means motivated interpretation as to how to carry out the mission. Such motivation springs from ahankar, when the movement and its leaders became deviated, and thus did not carefully pass down the knowledge of the real Krishna. The science of Krishna was scattered. It remains scattered. It then became the duty of those previously under that bad command to spot and reject all of it. Once spotted, it becomes obvious that ISKCON was converted into so-called ISKCON, the latter still being considered sacrosanct only by bewildered followers who have remained bamboozled by that institution. Their refusal to wake up entails those unfortunates continuing to follow deviants who brought in all of the inventions via personal and group ahankar, the latter being the air quotes ISKCON egregor. The air quotes ISKCON Confederation utilizes past warnings and admonitions of Prabhupada for its own purposes. However, their applicability has become invalidated over time. To be spooked by previous warnings from the Acharya, orders and admonitions from long ago, leads to congregational and institutional avidya, all of which went down in his name being wrongly believed to be perpetual. However, Prabhupada gave us warnings in the other direction. That being, that his movement could become deviated and thus devolve into an Upasampradaya. Those are the warnings, admonitions, and orders that we should now heed. We should reject the others because time, place, and circumstance has rendered them not only inapplicable, but false and counterproductive. When the orders of the Guru are directly connected to eternal religion, that is a manifestation of real dharma. When such is the case, it is known as Nitya dharma or Sanatana dharma. If we consider that dharma, when it is in the form of his orders, the Guru Vani, when it is in the form of his orders, the Guru Vani, then those orders also qualify as Nitya Vani. In other words, they're applicable in all circumstances at all times. In contrast, religion which is only applicable to time and place circumstances is known as naimittika dharma, and it is temporarily of some limited value only. When Prabhupada's orders were subject to devaluation and invalidation due to adverse time and place circumstances, and unfortunately, due to deviation, were actually invalidated, then those particular orders no longer are Nityavani. Leaders of ISKCON continue to utilize Naimittika in the guise of Nityavani, particularly in relation to Prabhupada's statements about his movement in general or about ISKCON or the vitiated GBC in particular. They want their followers to believe that all such statements from back in the day remain automatically absolute or nitya. However, once major deviation enters, they are not automatically to be categorized as constant of application. Any follower who falls victim to such, air quotes, ISKCON propaganda, which is Naimittika surreptitiously converted into Nityavani, is not employing higher intelligence. Higher intelligence is known as pragya. This is what we develop in Krishna consciousness. Disciples and followers without real knowledge are prone to naively believe such worn statements and orders, which are of little more than slogans now, to be automatically integral to Nitya Dharma and automatically linked to the Guru parampara, but they're not. This is because those followers believe their movement to be Nitya Dharma, which it isn't. Deviation, through the agency of bad leaders, along with time and place circumstances, have rendered this belief of those stupid followers false. The corrupt leaders easily control people who believe such parampara pabulum. Indeed, all active and dependent members functioning within that cult are controlled by its bureaucratic structure, combined with constant negative reinforcement, which is required in order to keep the concoction running. So-called ISKCON is run as an oligarchical tyranny. It is also a bureaucracy that appoints its initiating spiritual masters through a concocted device known as a no objection certificate. It previously voted them into the post, which was just as deviant, but obviously in a different way. Institutional designation has always been the hallmark of so-called ISKCON, even going back to the Zonal Acharya era. All 11 of them were voted into their office in their zones by the vitiated GBC, with only one commissioner voting against that proposed resolution. A genuine guru in Prabhupada's line is a spiritual master if and or when he reaches the platform of Madhyam Udhikari. That's special and let us frankly call it what it is, rare attainment, does not, however, automatically make him an initiating spiritual master. Yes, upon attaining Madhyam, he's a Shiksha Guru and a Vartma Pradarshaka Guru. Nevertheless, any such blessed disciple needs more than that in order to become a Diksha Guru in Prabhupada's branch of Chaitanya's movement. A genuine Guru is not designated as such by a corporate entity. He is not designated as such by a commission, or by a bureaucracy, or by a group, or by a committee of any sort. Consider this excerpt from a letter to one of Prabhupada's leading secretaries, dated December 2nd, 1972. Quote, Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. Once there is bureaucracy, the whole thing will be spoiled. Forget this centralizing and bureaucracy, unquote. This excerpt from that letter must be categorized as self-evident. Yet we all know that so-called ISKCON is now chock full of bureaucracy. And such has been the case for many years, for decades. Those bureaucratic departments are not meant for streamlining important services to the rank and file. On the contrary, they are meant to serve as buffering mechanisms of delay, sometimes even damage control, in order to protect vested interests from being directly challenged by underlings. Such an unauthorized paradigm of centralization is a bureaucratic arrangement. In so-called ISKCON, this arrangement also determines who can be an initiating guru in that movement and who cannot. If you submit an application or someone else does so on your behalf, and not without your encouragement, and then if you wait in queue to be recognized as a Diksha Guru, you most certainly are not a guru. You most certainly are not a guru. As I have said many times, institutional guru means bogus guru. A bogus guru gives improper initiations, while bureaucracy pervades the whole anti-Vedic arrangement. The no objection certificate is a symbol of bureaucratic meddling. Any such centralization scheme has no place in genuine Vaishnavism. And just who are these bureaucrats? They are the ISKCON party men, of course. They love centralization. They love all kinds of corporate arrangements. They think that the superficial stability it provides leads to both individual and cult confidence. They think wrongly, as it instead gradually leads to further deviation and degradation. This has already been evidenced over time. In that same 1972 letter, which we just excerpted, we find further proof of the foibles of a so-called Vaishnava movement that is seeped in bureaucracy and centralization. Quote, do not centralize anything. Each temple must remain independent and self-sufficient. That was my plan from the very beginning. Why are you thinking otherwise? Once before, you wanted to do something centralizing with your GBC meeting, and if I did not interfere, the whole thing would have been killed. Do not think in this way of big corporation, big credits, centralization. These are all nonsense proposals, unquote. All such nonsense proposals are emblematic of show bottle religion. Such pseudo-Vaishnavism ultimately centers around making a show of the deities, but that is not necessarily the initial development. In the case of the ISKCON, so-called ISKCON, major deviation, a different show surfaced first. At first, the deviated cult agreed to make a show of an unqualified but charismatic man taking opulent worship. The show of the deities sometimes takes second fiddle to the show of a pretender super-acharya, a super-acharya of Kali Yuga. That's how it played out in so-called ISKCON, as we all know now. In that first stage of institutional deviation, the air quotes ISKCON movement was run via a kind of gangster accommodation. It can be compared to the American Prohibition era, where all the local dons agreed to divvy up the city into separate sectors in which they would bootleg alcohol. This was similar to the zonal acharya era, where the ISKCON dons divided up their empire of the world into various initiation zones. At that time, each of them was the show battle center of their zone. The empire ran through the agency of emotional ploys used on the rank and file, such as love bombing, favoritism, bribery, and some paltry recognition of some sort. The ploys varied from zone to zone, from so-called guru to so-called guru. Of course, those ploys were only effective on the inmates who still believed in the con job. Just like the Roaring Twenties, where the ultimate enforcement was murder, if you did not go along with the 11 new heartbeats, enforcement was applied. Ultimate enforcement in the air quotes ISKCON gangland entailed being ostracized, accompanied by character assassination. If you criticize the new guru worship, the air quotes ISKCON empire preserved itself. It preserved itself, which means it struck back hard. Murder was not often employed, but that is not to say it was completely eschewed. Quite surprisingly, only one of the zonals ever wound up in prison, but he also beat a murder rap. It was all nothing but a show battle demonstration of pseudo-devotional and spiritual fervor. Prabhupada spoke or wrote many times against such show battles, pseudo-spiritualism, but it was nevertheless gaining steam, part of the air quotes ISKCON competitor thread in his movement by the mid-70s when he was still here. He was unable to nip it. Consider the following 4 quotes in order to gain a clearer understanding of that Sahajya harbinger, which would dominate his movement in the late 70s and the first half of the 80s. Quote, "If you want real benefit of spiritual life, don't be show bottle." Do you know show bottle? The medical shop, a big bottle? It is full of water only, and the color is red or blue or something like that. But the real medicine does not require. Real medicine does not require a show bottle. That was from a platform lecture in Hawaii dated January 23rd, 1975. Real medicine means chanting rounds on the beads and studying the books in order to gain transcendental knowledge and realization. This results in pragya, or higher intelligence. Show bottle devotional service works against those developments. It always has, and it always will. Here's another quote, this one from Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, Chapter 9, Text 47 in the purport. Quote, "Unfortunately, there are many so-called followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who are satisfied simply to construct a temple, make a show of the deities, collect some funds, and utilize them for eating and sleeping," unquote. This is a later development after institutionalism replaces big gurus with big egos and big zones. At least that's the way it played out in so-called ISKCON, in that history. Making this show is what developed in the form of the second transformation and the third transformation after the heady days of the zonal acharya imposition. Notice from the excerpt quote, many so-called followers, unquote. If the shoe fits, then perhaps the institution that it fits is wearing it. Here's another one. This one's from a platform lecture early in his movement in New York City, dated September 14th, 1966. Quote, in India, we have got some show bottles in the medicine shop. Some red water put into the big bottle with electric light. That means advertisement. Here's a bottle of medicine. But that is a show bottle. It's just red water. So red water will not cure the disease. It is stated clearly, according to Bhagavad Gita, show bottle demonstration will not make you successful. You have to be really bottle of medicine. If you want to be satisfied becoming a show bottle, then that's a different thing. Remain a show bottle. But if you want really actual success, then you cannot adopt that process, unquote. Notice, as I already mentioned, this lecture took place in autumn 1966. Prabhupada even then knew how the devolution of his movement would transpire, so he tried to prevent it by such warnings in advance. He could not prevent it, and the zonal Acharya catastrophe is proof of that. As such, this quote now serves as an advance warning for our benefit, a warning made a decade in advance. And here's the final one. This one was from a platform lecture at the Moundsville compound in West Virginia, dated September 6, 1972. I happened to be there during this one. Quote, you are simply wasting time by going to church or temple or mosque or any nonsense. No padayed yadi rating, shrama evahi kevalam. Simply waste of time. So don't become a show bottle of religious life. Actually try to understand what is religion, what is God, and make your life successful, unquote. It's church. It's church. It's church. One godbrother had a dream wherein Prabhupada shouted this to him. An institutional religion contains institutional gurus. It performs institutional initiations, which only produces devolution, especially after the improperly initiated people take over when the initial sahajas slowly die off. The Sanskrit word shrama is important here. It means useless. Show bottle devotional service is not real seva. It is performed by individuals with a grudge. It is performed by audacious and powerful people who hurt inside. Those 11 great pretenders were all hurt men. It is a fact that Prabhupada chastised them. Some he chastised hard. Some he chastised often. He did not appoint any of them as his successor. In point of fact, he did not recognize any of them as gurus. How could he do so? As such, they each nursed resentment. They each nursed a grudge. And because of that, they decided to misuse their power. As a result, through the facilitation of the vitiated GBC, they climbed atop the shells of the turtles below them, rose to the top of the turtle tank, and became self-appointed Mahabhagavats. Sure, there was a vote, but that was rigged. The 11 constituted just one vote shy of one half of the governing body, but their influence on it and in it and over it was at least 80%. Through GBC imprimatur, which they engineered, they passed the Guru Resolution of 1978. This was without any input from the non-GBC Godbrothers and very little, almost negligible resistance from the other commissioners, since those fellows did not want to jeopardize their status in the governing body. The 11 rascals enforced worship of themselves by everyone else in the movement, including Godbrothers and Godsisters. The whole show was nothing but a pseudo-devotional abomination. They harmed everyone who did not fall in line, who did not serve them. What to speak of those godbrothers who opposed and exposed them? The colossal hoax, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, is a pseudo-spiritual scam. It has been a show battle since the spring of 1978. It is a show battle of a different color now. The first transformation was bright red water, advertised as potent medicine, but which, when you drank it, poisoned you. The second transformation was a show battle of a different color. It was pink, but just as poisonous, yet in a different, collegiate way. The Hinduization of so-called ISKCON, the third transformation, is just as poisonous. It is green-colored water, since it is so dependent upon the Hindu money in order to stay afloat. However, in due course, it will fail like the others. The initial wave of the leaders of so-called ISKCON were, in the words of George Harrison, just like weeping Atlas cedars. They just needed to grow and grow and grow. Finally, they were stopped, but the needle in and the damage done. All of those leaders, and many of today's, were and are individually loaded with resentment. They have harmed many of their godbrothers over the course of the last 4 decades. They gave pain, and they are receiving pain in return. Those devotees they harmed, remind them of what they have done. That memory causes them pain today. The memory of past aggression is not successfully repressed in those oppressors. They begrudge that. This causes them continued psychic pain. So they must find new ways and means to afflict those they formerly oppressed, who they can still harm, because those devotees serve as painful reminders. In summary, hurt people hurt people. Sadeva Samya